And with me today, I've got my co-author, Dr. Jenny Cave, and she's research affiliate at the University of Swansea in Wales, and she's also honorary research fellow at Massey University in New Zealand. And Jenny and I started this process of really trying to examine diverse and alternative economies about 2 years ago. So welcome, Jenny.
Thank you. Lovely to be here. Great to see you.
What do you think diverse and alternative economies are? Can you explain what they mean in the contexts you've been working in?
Well, for me, it's always has to do with not business as usual, going beyond business as usual. So it's looking at the wider ways in which value is created in communities and exchange happens and incomes flow that's not just within the formal business model. And I come from a family of artists. I'm the pathological organizer. There's got to be one in every family, right? But I've always been interested in how enterprise can develop and how my family can earn income from their art. So that's really where I started. And that led me to working with Māori communities and then into the Pacific. And I did a 5-year-long project with 5 Pacific communities in Western Auckland in New Zealand as part. And in that we looked at the different ways in which enterprises are developed. So I got very interested in the ideas that the social world affects the way in which you can earn incomes and the ways in which you value the society around you and the way in which you're embedded in your society and your community also affects the kinds of enterprises that you can do. And that takes you out of the formal business as usual consumer models. It takes you into the exchange economy. It takes you into gifting. It takes you into enterprises that have to do with creativity. So art and culture, creating treasures that are of ritual significance in both in European, of course, but also in Indigenous communities, and also into those things that are deliberately built or created in order to sell. And in Pacifica communities, there's a lot of energy that goes into, first of all, creating the treasures. Secondly, into creating and making weavings, etc., that are designed to be gifted within the social exchange systems that are essential within those communities. But if there's enough left over, can be sold. And so those are things that are initially made for gifting, but can be sold if there's enough. So there's the treasures then and the not-for-profit items that are made, but then there are some that are deliberately made for sale. And within my family, who are weavers and silk painters, they will make things in order to sell them, and they'll also give them away. But they will sell them at markets, which are informal economies. They'll sell them in shops, gift shops, which takes it into the more formal economy. So those are things that are deliberately created for sale. But also then you've got the global commerce, the big named brands like Air Tahiti or Air New Zealand, which are global commerce. There's a whole range of different types of enterprise that are embedded in societies and embedded in cultures. So for me, enterprise is not just business. It's not just the formal business, but nor is it informal. It takes it right into earning income within a system of exchange and embedded in culture.
So I guess one of the things that I really would like to draw out here is that what you're talking about is a cultural change as well, to recognise the light and the shade, the grey spaces in the way that we undertake our exchange. And I think perhaps the language that we have used for quite some decades or even centuries around the economic model with the exchange of labour and capital, it has really sort of shaped the way that we think about economy. But what you're suggesting is that if we actually opened up our mind to think about different forms of exchange as a cultural phenomenon, we can actually see that there are already diverse economies, and it's not a new concept.
So Well, it may be a new concept, but it's not a new reality about the way that people live and operate in every society, whether it's the global north or the global south. The global south is more equipped in many ways in being able to enact these types of enterprise because the social, the exchange, the socialist values, the importance of community, it's far more embedded as a system than in the global north, where so often the neoliberal formal business models take precedence. But it's not just looking at transactions either. So largely I'm talking about transactions there, but as you've hinted, it's also the types of labor and what's valued as labor. So my time is valued. My experiences are valued. Everyone's abilities and skills are valued, but those tend not to be valued in the formal enterprise system unless they're called goodwill. But that in some ways denigrates their importance. The realities are these informal and alternative ways of operating exist in every society. So I do think it's important to recognize that there's different forms of enterprise that are capitalist, yes, which is in many ways a northern model, but also alternative capitalist, where you've got, say, state-owned enterprise or social enterprises. And then also you can get the things that are totally non-capitalist, the communal enterprises or independent of enterprises too. But embedded in all of those are different forms of labor and different forms of property, different forms of owning property. If something is communally owned, that's very different than the ownership of an individual company by an individual, pardon me. And also the types of transactions, those also vary because ethical trading, for example, or fair trade, where your value is quite different than just a monetary sale, or where you have cooperatives and barter, that's part of the exchange economy. And gifting and indigenous exchange or hunting and fishing, those also have value and they're forms of transaction because they can be passed on within the community. But those are alternates as well. But sitting under that, all of that too is different finance and different versions of finance. The mainstream finance, the private banks and the financial services, etc. But alternative finance companies or enterprises are, say, community-based lenders or microfinances, and yet things that don't even fit in the market model or even alternative market model, you could perhaps call them non-market, are things like sweat equity, the things that Habitat for Humanity, for example, uses, where your family comes together and your friends to help you build your house. And Habitat for Humanity values the hours spent as part of the amount of money that you have to not repay to Habitat for Humanity in the building of your house. So those are the whole different sets of mainstream and alternative and indeed non-mainstream things that exist already. So I think the global south is far more equipped than the global north because, as I said earlier, they're far more used to non-capitalist forms of exchange.
And so how in tourism do we start to recognise this a bit more, or have we recognised it? Because as you're listing all those examples, I'm thinking about volunteer tourism, for example, but that's had such criticism because it's actually, it has been criticised for being quite exploitative and just another sort of capitalist model. How in tourism do we try to progress these ideas about diverse economies and get them more widely acknowledged?
Well, I think it comes back perhaps to the way in which we form our business model. If you have a diverse way of earning income or creating value, let's stop calling it earning income. Let's call it creating value. Because if you're creating value that has a monetary value, that's a different set of operations. And we're very familiar with those in tourism. You think about developing a service, somebody comes in and uses that service, and there's an exchange of money for that service. But if in that entire system you start to think, well, how can we diversify the ways in which we add value to the operation, to our organizations, to our place in the community? Can we perhaps look at ways where people's time can be banked and offered? Can we look at ways in which people's skills can be offered and incorporated in our business? So instead of perhaps saying, well, we want you to pay us money to come and use our B&B, maybe it's, how about you donate your time to us because you happen to be a very good chef? How about you come into our kitchen for a few hours, and that then we can exchange that valued service for, say, a bed in our house. It's a little bit about like woofers. Those have a little bit of hint there. So there's different ways we can look at time, we can look at skills, we can look at different forms of enterprise. Maybe also think about the ways in which we structure the types of value within an operation that's not just a service provision, say an accommodation. But even at accommodation, you have food, you have cleaning services, you have gardening, you have a whole range of different activities that are required. So it's not just offering an accommodation option. So maybe there are ways in which you can embed those services in other types of ways of creating value. So you look at you start to see your business differently and plan it differently.
But I think what you're also suggesting is that we need to come together. You know, there is a level of this that is requires collective action. And I think that our models up to this point have really focused on individual action and individual wealth accumulation. Yes. So I think, you know, it is the cultural shift that we need to welcome the reimagining of our economic systems in a way that that creates value. But I think also one of the other things that I'd like to point out from your conversation is you're talking about what I would think about meaningful work. So in a lot of the work that you were talking about, we're actually moving back from somebody buying labour or selling their labour into a system and instead transitioning to something where you're actually doing the work because it's meaningful work as well. And of course that factors into this whole future of work debate, the future of work debate, the future of the economy debate. So it's much bigger.
I think it also, the other thing that's important has to do with the goals of your enterprise. What are the goals? Are your goals to create treasures that are of ritual significance and of social importance? Are your goals to create objects that can be exchanged and gifted at weddings or gifted at family events? Is your goal to earn money only? Is your goal to have a wide profile and impact on the world as a global corporation? So all of those things make a big difference as to how you run your enterprise. And it may well be that we could rethink our notions of enterprise and say, well, we'll run this particular type of operation, but that's our educational purpose, or that's our social purpose, and it's beyond corporate social responsibility. Let's not go there for now. And to looking at the ways in which what types of value can support the survival of the enterprise. If your enterprise is to basically support your lifestyle as a family, if your enterprise is supposed to support a community at large, or you want it to support your wider community or of family members, then that means you think differently about the types of value and the types of goals of the enterprise. So I think we're driven by the banks, by the lenders who can give us money up front to get started. We're driven down this business as usual model without thinking about the wider sets of purposes, because a an income earning enterprise can cross-subsidize the education and the social goals. So I'm encouraging people to think more broadly about what the notion of enterprise is in terms of not just its goals or not just its operation, but also how it's embedded in the wider community.
So I think just one final question here. What you're advocating is also you know, we're not going to be able to get rid of money. I mean, that's not what you're arguing at all, but it's a hybridization of the economy and a greater diversity. So it's not actually so much alternative as it is diverse.
Yeah. However, there are alternatives too, and we can see that in some of the examples, say in Ecuador, where there's deliberate and where the system allows them to, because it's a very regulated system at the government level, there's actually resistance to that regulation. And there are communities that are setting up informal enterprises and locally constructed like a destination organization to undertake community work and to undertake the kind of functions that the regulated system would like to do, but actually cannot for various reasons. And then that piece of research, that journal article that you and I co-authored, there are several examples from Ecuador, from Cuba, from Fiji, and from Sardinia, as well as the one from Denmark, where there are different ways of operating alternative.
All right, Jenny, thank you so much.
Okay, look forward to seeing you again. Ciao.
Okay, good. We can